The fifth book, entitled Terpsichore. The Persians left behind by King Darius in Europe, who had Megabazus for their general, reduced before any other Hellespontine state the people of Perinthus, who had no mind to become subjects of the king. Now the Perinthians had ere this been roughly handled by another nation, the Paeonians. For the Paeonians, from about the Strymon, were once bidden by an oracle to make war upon the Perinthians, and if these latter, when the camps faced one another, challenged them by name to fight, then to venture on a battle, but if otherwise, not to make the hazard. The Paeonians followed the advice. Now the men of Perinthus drew out to meet them in the skirts of their city, and a threefold single combat was fought on challenge given. Man to man, and horse to horse, and dog to dog was the strife waged, and the Perinthians, winners of 2 combats out of the 3, in their joy had raised the paean, when the Paeonians, struck by the thought that this was what the oracle had meant, passed the word one to another, saying, "Now of a surety has the oracle been fulfilled for us. Now our work begins." Then the Paeonians set upon the Perinthians in the midst of their paean, and defeated them utterly, leaving but few of them alive. Such was the affair of the Paeonians, which happened a long time previously. At this time the Perinthians, after a brave struggle for freedom, were overcome by numbers, and yielded to Megabazus and his Persians. After Perinthus had been brought under, Megabazus led his host through Thrace, subduing to the dominion of the king all the towns and all the nations of those parts. For the king's command to him was that he should conquer Thrace. The Thracians are the most powerful people in the world, except of course the Indians, and if they had one head, or were agreed among themselves, it's my belief that their match could not be found anywhere, and that they would very far surpass all other nations. But such union is impossible for them, and there are no means of ever bringing it about. Herein therefore consists their weakness. The Thracians bear many names in the different regions of their country, but all of them have like usages in every respect, except only the Getae, the Trauci, and those who dwell above the people of Creston. Now the manners and customs of the Getae, who believe in their immortality, I've already spoken of. The Trauci in all else resemble the other Thracians, but have customs at births and deaths, which I'll now describe. When a child is born, all its kindred sit round about it in a circle and weep for the woes it will have to undergo now that it's come into the world, making mention of every ill that falls to the lot of humankind. When, on the other hand, a man has died, they bury him with laughter and rejoicings, and say that now he's free from a host of sufferings and enjoys the completest happiness. The Thracians who live above the Crestonians observe the following customs. Each man among them has several wives, and no sooner does a man die than a sharp contest ensues among the wives upon the question which of them all the husband loved most tenderly. The friends of each eagerly plead on her behalf, and she to whom the honour is adjudged, after receiving the praises both of men and women, is slain over the grave by the hand of her next of kin, and then buried with her husband. The others are sorely grieved, for nothing is considered such a disgrace. The Thracians who do not belong to these tribes have the customs which follow. They sell their children to traders. On their maidens they keep no watch, but allow them to enjoy any men they wished, while on the conduct of their wives they keep a most strict watch. Brides are purchased of their parents for large sums of money. Tattooing among them marks noble birth, and the want of it low birth. To be idle is accounted the most honourable thing, and to be a tiller of the ground the most dishonourable. To live by war and plunder is of all things the most glorious. These are the most remarkable of their customs. The gods which they worship are but 3, Ares, Dionysus, and Artemis. Their kings, however, unlike the rest of the citizens, worship Hermes more than any other god, always swearing by his name, and declaring that they are themselves sprung from him. Their wealthy ones are buried in the following fashion. the body is laid out for 3 days, and during this time they kill victims of all kinds, and feast upon them, after first bewailing the departed. Then they either burn the body, or else bury it in the ground. Lastly, they raise a mound over the grave, and hold games of all sorts, wherein the single combat is awarded the highest prize. Such is the mode of burial among the Thracians. As regards the region lying north of this country, no one can say with any certainty what men inhabit it. It appears that you no sooner cross the Ister than you enter on an interminable wilderness. The only people of whom I can hear as dwelling beyond the Ister are the race named Sigynni, who wear, they say, a dress like the Medes, and have horses which are covered entirely with a coat of shaggy hair 5 fingers in length. They are a small breed, flat-nosed, and not strong enough to bear men on their backs, but when yoked to chariots, they're among the swiftest known, which is the reason why the people of that country use chariots. Their borders reach down almost to the Eneti upon the Adriatic Sea, and they call themselves colonists of the Medes. But how they can be colonists of the Medes, I, for my part, can't imagine. Still, nothing is impossible in the long lapse of ages. Sigynni is the name which the Ligurians, who dwell above Massilia, give to traders, while among the Cyprians the word means spears. According to the account which the Thracians give, the country beyond the Ister is possessed by bees, on account of which it's impossible to penetrate farther. But in this they seem to me to say what has no likelihood, for it's certain that those creatures are very impatient of cold. I rather believe that it's on account of the cold that the regions which lie under the Bear are without inhabitants. Such then are the accounts given of this country, the sea coast whereof Megabazus was now employed in subjecting to the Persians. King Darius had no sooner crossed the Hellespont and reached Sardis than he bethought himself of the good deed of Histiaeus the Milesian, and the good counsel of the Mytilenean Coes. He therefore sent for both of them to Sardis, and bade them each crave a boon at his hands. Now Histiaeus, as he was already king of Miletus, didn't make request for any government besides, but asked Darius to give him Myrcinus of the Ionians, where he wished to build him a city. Such was the choice that Histiaeus made. Coes, on the other hand, as he was a mere burgher and not a king, requested the sovereignty of Mytilene. Both alike obtained their requests, and straightway betook themselves to the places which they had chosen. It chanced in the meantime that King Darius saw a sight which determined him to bid Megabazus remove the Paeonians from their seats in Europe and transport them to Asia. There were 2 Paeonians, Pygres and Mantias, whose ambition it was to obtain the sovereignty over their countrymen. As soon, therefore, as ever Darius crossed into Asia, these men came to Sardis, and brought with them their sister, who was a tall and beautiful woman. Having so done, they waited till a day came when the king sat in state in the suburb of the Lydians, and then, dressing their sister in the richest gear they could, sent her to draw water for them. She bore a pitcher upon her head, and with one arm led a horse, while all the way as she went she span flax. Now as she passed by where the king was, Darius took notice of her, for it was neither like the Persians nor the Lydians, nor any of the dwellers in Asia, to do as she did. Darius accordingly noted her, and ordered some of his guard to follow her steps, and watch to see what she would do with the horse. So the spearmen went, and the woman, when she came to the river, first watered the horse, and then, filling the pitcher, came back the same way she had gone, with the pitcher of water upon her head, and the horse dragging upon her arm, while she still kept twirling the spindle. King Darius was full of wonder, both at what they who had watched the woman told him, and at what he had himself seen. So he commanded that she should be brought before him. And the woman came, and with her appeared her brothers, who had been watching everything a little way off. Then Darius asked them of what nation the woman was, and the young men replied that they were Paeonians, and she was their sister. Darius rejoined by asking who the Paeonians were, and in what part of the world they lived, and further, what business had brought the young men to Sardis. Then the brothers told him they had come to put themselves under his power, and Paeonia was a country upon the river Strymon, and the Strymon was at no great distance from the Hellespont. The Paeonians, they said, were colonists of the Teucrians from Troy. When they had thus answered his questions, Darius asked if all the women of their country worked so hard. Then the brothers eagerly answered yes, for this was the very object with which the whole thing had been done. So Darius wrote letters to Megabazus, the commander whom he had left behind in Thrace, and ordered him to remove the Paeonians from their own land and bring them into his presence, men, women, and children. And straightway a horseman took the message and rode at speed to the Hellespont, and crossing it gave the paper to Megabazus. Then Megabazus, as soon as he had read it, and procured guides from Thrace, made war upon Paeonia. Now when the Paeonians heard that the Persians were marching against them, they gathered themselves together and marched down to the sea coast, since they thought the Persians would endeavour to enter their country on that side. Here then they stood in readiness to oppose the army of Megabazus. But the Persians, who knew that they had collected and were gone to keep guard at the pass near the sea, got guides, and taking the inland route before the Paeonians were aware, poured down upon their cities, from which the men had all marched out, and finding them empty, easily got possession of them. Then the men, when they heard that all their towns were taken, scattered this way and that to their homes, and gave themselves up to the Persians. And so these tribes of the Paeonians, to wit, the Syro-Paeonians, the Paeopleans, and all the others as far as Lake Praesius, were torn from their seats and led away into Asia. They, on the other hand, who dwelt about Mount Pangaium and in the country of the Doberes, the Agrianians and the Odomantians, and they likewise who inhabited Lake Praesius, were not conquered by Megabazus. He sought indeed to subdue the dwellers upon the lake, but couldn't effect his purpose. Their manner of living is the following. Platforms, supported upon tall piles, stand in the middle of the lake, which are approached from the land by a single narrow bridge. At the first, the piles which bear up the platforms were fixed in their places by the whole body of the citizens, but since that time the custom which has prevailed about fixing them is this. They are brought from a hill called Obilus, and every man drives in 3 for each wife that he marries. Now the men have all many wives apiece, and this is the way in which they live. Each has his own hut, wherein he dwells, upon one of the platforms, and each has also a trapdoor giving access to the lake beneath. And their wont is to tie their baby children by the foot with a string to save them from rolling into the water. They feed their horses and their other beasts upon fish, which abound in the lake to such a degree that a man has only to open his trapdoor and to let down a basket by a rope into the water, and then to wait a very short time, when he draws it up quite full of them. The fish are of 2 kinds, which they call the paprax and the tilon. The Paeonians, therefore, at least such of them as had been conquered, were led away into Asia. As for Megabazus, he no sooner brought the Paeonians under than he sent into Macedonia an embassy of Persians, choosing for the purpose the 7 men of most note in all the army after himself. These persons were to go to Amyntas and require him to give earth and water to King Darius. Now there's a very short cut from the Lake Praesius across to Macedonia. Quite close to the lake is the mine which yielded afterwards a talent of silver a day to Alexander, and from this mine you have only to cross the mountain called Disorum to find yourself in the Macedonian territory. So the Persians sent upon this errand, when they reached the court and were brought into the presence of Amyntas, required him to give earth and water to King Darius. And Amyntas not only gave them what they asked, but also invited them to come and feast with him, after which he made ready the board with great magnificence and entertained the Persians in right friendly fashion. Now when the meal was over, and they were all set to the drinking, the Persians said, "Dear Macedonian, we Persians have a custom when we make a great feast to bring with us to the board our wives and concubines and make them sit beside us. Now then, as thou hast received us so kindly, and feasted us so handsomely, and givest moreover earth and water to King Darius, do also after our custom in this matter. Then Amyntas answered, O Persians, we have no such custom as this, but with us men and women are kept apart. Nevertheless, since you, who are our lords, wish it, this also shall be granted to you. When Amyntas had thus spoken, he bade some go and fetch the women. And the women came at his call, and took their seats in a row over against the Persians. Then when the Persians saw that the women were fair and comely, they spoke again to Amyntas, and said that what had been done was not wise, for it had been better for the women not to have come at all than to come in this way, and not to sit by their sides, but to remain over against them, the torment of their eyes. So Amyntas was forced to bid the women sit side by side with the Persians. The women did as he ordered, and then the Persians, who had drunk more than they ought, began to put their hands on them. And one even tried to give the woman next him a kiss. King Amyntas saw, but he kept silence, although sorely grieved, for he greatly feared the power of the Persians. Alexander, however, Amyntas's son, who was likewise there and witnessed the whole, being a young man and unacquainted with suffering, couldn't any longer restrain himself. He therefore, full of wrath, spoke thus to Amyntas, Dear father, thou art old, and should spare thyself. Rise up from table and go take thy rest. Do not stay out the drinking. I will remain with the guests, and give them all that is fitting. Amyntas, who guessed that Alexander would play some wild prank, made answer, Dear son, thy words sound to me as those of one who is well nigh on fire, and I perceive thou sendest me away that thou mayst do some wild deed. I beseech thee, make no commotion about these men, lest thou bring us all to ruin, but bear to look calmly on what they do. For myself I will e'en withdraw, as thou biddest me. Amyntas, when he had thus besought his son, went out. And Alexander said to the Persians, Look on these ladies as your own, dear strangers, all or any of them. Only tell us your wishes. But now, as the evening wears, and I see you have all had wine enough, let them, if you please, retire, and when they have bathed, they shall come back again. To this the Persians agreed, and Alexander, having got the women away, sent them off to the harem, and made ready in their room an equal number of beardless youths, whom he dressed in the garments of the women, and then, arming them with daggers, brought them in to the Persians, saying as he introduced them, Methinks, dear Persians, that your entertainment has fallen short in nothing. We have set before you all that we had ourselves in store, and all that we could anywhere find to give you. And now, to crown the whole, we make over to you our sisters and our mothers, that you may perceive yourselves to be entirely honored by us, even as you deserve to be, and also that you may take back word to the king who sent you here, that there was one man, a Greek, the satrap of Macedonia, by whom you were both feasted and lodged handsomely. So speaking, Alexander set by the side of each Persian one of those whom he had called Macedonian women, but who were, in truth, men. And these men, when the Persians began to be rude, dispatched them with their daggers. So the ambassadors perished by this death, both they and also their followers. For the Persians had brought a great train with them, carriages and attendants and baggage of every kind, all of which disappeared at the same time as the men themselves. Not very long afterwards the Persians made strict search for their lost embassy. But Alexander, with much wisdom, hushed up the business, bribing those sent on the errand, partly with money and partly with the gift of his own sister, Gygia, whom he gave in marriage to Bubares, a Persian, the chief leader of the expedition which came in search of the lost men. Thus the death of these Persians was hushed up, and no more was said of it. Now that the men of this family are Greeks, sprung from Perdiccas, as they themselves affirm, is a thing which I can declare of my own knowledge, and which I will hereafter make plainly evident. That they are so has been already adjudged by those who managed the Pan-Hellenic contest at Olympia. For when Alexander wished to contend in the games, and had come to Olympia with no other view, the Greeks who were about to run against him would have excluded him from the contest, saying that Greeks only were allowed to contend, and not barbarians. But Alexander proved himself to be an Argive, and was distinctly adjudged a Greek, after which he entered the lists for the foot race, and was drawn to run in the first pair. Thus was this matter settled. Megabazus, having reached the Hellespont with the Paeonians, crossed it and went up to Sardis. He had become aware, while in Europe, that Histiaeus the Milesian was raising a wall at Myrcinus, the town upon the Strymon, which he had obtained from King Darius as his guerdon for keeping the bridge. No sooner, therefore, did he reach Sardis with the Paeonians than he said to Darius, "What mad thing is this that thou hast done, sire, to let a Greek, a wise man and a shrewd, get hold of a town in Thrace, a place too where there is abundance of timber fit for shipbuilding, and ores in plenty, and mines of silver, and about which are many dwellers, both Greek and barbarian, ready enough to take him for their chief, and by day and night to do his bidding? I pray thee, make this man cease his work, if thou wouldst not be entangled in a war with thine own followers. Stop him, but with a gentle message, only bidding him to come to thee. Then, when thou once hast him in thy power, be sure thou take good care that he never get back to Greece again." With these words Megabazus easily persuaded Darius, who thought he had shown true foresight in this matter. Darius therefore sent a messenger to Myrcinus, who said, "These be the words of the king to thee, O Histiaeus. I have looked to find a man well affectioned towards me, and towards my greatness, and I have found none whom I can trust like thee. Thy deeds, and not thy words only, have proved thy love for me. Now then, since I have a mighty enterprise in hand, I pray thee, come to me, that I may show thee what I purpose." Histiaeus, when he heard this, put faith in the words of the messenger, and as it seemed to him a grand thing to be the king's counsellor, he straightway went up to Sardis. Then Darius, when he was come, said to him, "Dear Histiaeus, hear why I have sent for thee. No sooner did I return from Scythia and lose thee out of my sight, than I longed, as I have never longed for aught else, to behold thee once more, and to interchange speech with thee. Right sure I am, there is nothing in all the world so precious as a friend, who is at once wise and true, both which thou art, as I have had good proof in what thou hast already done for me. Now then, 'tis well thou art come, for look, I have an offer to make to thee. Let go Miletus and thy newly founded town in Thrace, and come with me up to Susa. Share all that I have, live with me, and be my counsellor." When Darius had thus spoken, he made Artaphernes, his brother by the father's side, governor of Sardis, and taking Histiaeus with him, went up to Susa. He left as general of all the troops upon the sea-coast Otanes, son of Sisamnes, whose father King Cambyses slew and flayed, because that he, being of the number of the royal judges, had taken money to give an unrighteous sentence. Therefore Cambyses slew and flayed Sisamnes, and cutting his skin into strips, stretched them across the seat of the throne whereon he had been wont to sit when he heard causes. Having so done, Cambyses appointed the son of Sisamnes to be judge in his father's room, and bade him never forget in what way his seat was cushioned. Accordingly, this Otanes, who had occupied so strange a throne, became the successor of Megabazus in his command, and took first of all Byzantium and Chalcedon, then Antandrus in the Troas, and next Lamponium. This done, he borrowed ships of the Lesbians, and took Limnos and Imbros, which were still inhabited by the Pelasgians. Now the Lemnians stood on their defence, and fought gallantly. But when they were brought low in course of time, such as outlived the struggle were placed by the Persians under the government of Lycoritus, the brother of the Myandrius, who was tyrant of Samos. This Lycoritus died afterwards in his government. The cause which Otanes alleged for conquering and enslaving all these nations was that some had refused to join the king's army against Scythia, while others had molested the host on its return. Such were the exploits which Otanes performed in his command. Afterwards, but for no long time, there was a respite from suffering. Then from Naxos and Miletus troubles gathered anew about Ionia. Now Naxos at this time surpassed all the other islands in prosperity, and Miletus had reached the height of her power and was the glory of Ionia. But previously, for 2 generations, the Milesians had suffered grievously from civil disorders, which were composed by the Paeonians, whom the Milesians chose before all the rest of the Greeks to rearrange their government. Now the way in which the Paeonians healed their differences was the following. A number of the chief Paeonians came to Miletus, and when they saw in how ruined a condition the Milesians were, they said that they would like first to go over their country. So they went through all Milesia, and on their way, whenever they saw in the waste and desolate country any land that was well farmed, they took down the names of the owners in their tablets. And having thus gone through the whole region, and obtained after all but few names, they called the people together on their return to Miletus, and made proclamation that they gave the government into the hands of those persons whose lands they had found well farmed. For they thought it likely, they said, that the same persons who had managed their own affairs well would likewise conduct aright the business of the state. The other Milesians, who in time past had been at variance, they placed under the rule of these men. Thus was the Milesian government set in order by the Paeonians. It was, however, from the 2 cities above mentioned that troubles began now to gather again about Ionia, and this is the way in which they arose. Certain of the rich men had been banished from Naxos by the commonalty, and upon their banishment had fled to Miletus. Aristagoras, son of Molpagoras, the nephew and likewise the son-in-law of Histiaeus, son of Lysagoras, who was still kept by Darius at Susa, happened to be regent of Miletus at the time of their coming. For the kingly power belonged to Histiaeus, but he was at Susa when the Naxians came. Now these Naxians had in times past been bond friends of Histiaeus, and so on their arrival at Miletus they addressed themselves to Aristagoras and begged him to lend them such aid as his ability allowed, in hopes thereby to recover their country. Then Aristagoras, considering with himself that if the Naxians should be restored by his help he would be lord of Naxos, put forward the friendship with Histiaeus to cloak his views, and spoke as follows. I can't engage to furnish you with such a power as were needful to force you against their will upon the Naxians who hold the city, for I know they can bring into the field 8,000 bucklers, and have also a vast number of ships of war. But I will do all that lies in my power to get you some aid, and I think I can manage it in this way. Artaphernes happens to be my friend. Now he's a son of Hystaspes and brother to King Darius. All the sea coast of Asia is under him, and he has a numerous army and numerous ships. I think I can prevail on him to do what we require. When the Naxians heard this, they empowered Aristagoras to manage the matter for them as well as he could, and told him to promise gifts and pay for the soldiers, which they said they would readily furnish, since they had great hope that the Naxians, so soon as they saw them returned, would render them obedience, and likewise the other islanders, for at that time not one of the Cyclades was subject to King Darius. So Aristagoras went to Sardis, and told Artaphernes that Naxos was an island of no great size, but a fair land and fertile, lying near Ionia, and containing much treasure and a vast number of slaves. Make war then upon this land, he said, and reinstate the exiles. For if thou wilt do this, first of all, I have very rich gifts in store for thee, besides the cost of the armament, which it's fair that we who are the authors of the war should pay. And secondly, thou wilt bring under the power of the king, not only Naxos, but the other islands which depend on it, as Paros, Andros, and all the rest of the Cyclades. And when thou hast gained these, thou mayest easily go on against Euboea, which is a large and wealthy island, not less in size than Cyprus, and very easy to bring under. 100 ships were quite enough to subdue the whole. The other answered, Truly thou art the author of a plan which may much advantage the house of the king, and thy counsel is good in all points except the number of the ships.